Welcome to the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society this morning. My name is Kim Cobb. I'm the director here, and we're just thrilled to welcome you all on this incredible occasion of the panel for Family Weekend at Brown. So I want to give a special welcome to our parents, to our family, and to the students who may have accompanied you today, and what some of you, this may be your first introduction to the Institute. And so IBES is the Institute at Brown that anchors work in sustainability, climate, and the environment, both in the undergraduate programming that we serve over 100 students for in our concentration, but also students from across campus, including students like Zoe and many of the people who are here from other concentrations. And we have a thriving research program that seeks to leverage our research for solutions in this space. So I want to first give a special thank you to the staff at IBES for just carrying out this amazing planning to get us all here today. So let's give them a round of applause. Just incredible effort. And what a turnout. This is an incredible day for IBES to be kicking off in this particular space around sustainable finance and investing and engagement with the private sector, which is one of our core ambitions. I wanted to just give some opening remarks. You know, as I'm fond of saying, I'm only a climate scientist. But I think it's important that we begin with some recognition of where we are with the pace and scope of climate change that is upon us today, with September ushering in a new record, of course, the warmest September on record, one of many records broken this year. And of course, 2023 is basically a complete 100% lock for the warmest year on record. So that's, of course, one of 10 warmest years on records that have occurred in the last 10 years. And so this is something that we know is going to accelerate in the near term, and it's going to have lasting and multi-generational impacts that will ring forward on our planet for centuries and millennia to come. So we find ourselves in this really pivotal moment as in human history, and we have to think about what a new definition of climate action that engages all scales, all people, all corners of the world, and basically includes multiple sectors like the private sector, the public sector, and higher education, which is why I'm so excited to be thinking about what the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society can do as a catalyst for a new level of climate action to rise to this moment. So that's where my passion purpose is as a climate scientist, but I know that's why you are here today, to try to learn how you might engage in acquiring new knowledge, acquiring new recipes for your engagement and opportunities. So thank you for joining us today and sharing in that vision. I wanted to say that we do have a new strategic plan at IBES. You can go to our website, ibes.brown.edu, and you can click on the link that says strategic plan. We just launched it in March. And what you will see is an articulated vision for solutions acceleration in this moment, across climate, across sustainability, across environment. A vision that brings our students along with us and seeks to equip them with the tools and networks and knowledge that they will need to succeed in their goals in this moment, which are the most ambitious and the loftiest and most important goals I have ever felt on my skin from a generation of young people. So I want to just recognize our role and our goal in that through our strategic plan, which is focused on solutions and students, if I could bring two words to bear on that issue. Now, of course, we cannot do this alone, and that's why we're here today. No institute can do it alone, no university can do it alone, no company can do it alone, no individual, no leader, no matter how powerful, can do this alone. So we're going to need partners, which is another key word from our strategic plan. We think about partnerships very broadly. We think about partnerships across campus, but most importantly, we recognize the need for partnerships that extend beyond campus, that help us understand where the solutions might lie for the kind of scale and impact that we seek to have in this moment, how we can be catalysts and accelerators through those partnerships. And that's why I think this discussion here today is so important in kicking off our intent as an institute to be heavily engaged in these conversations and focus our research and our student talent and their dreams on these solutions that are in many cases at our fingertips, in some cases are just on the horizon, but we want to bring those solutions to the Institute, to the students here at Brown, and we want to get them thinking about their lifelong trajectories of impact, which is what they are seeking in this moment. And I also just want to note that we are today, in fact, launching our new network for alumni and family at IBES. And so there's a QR code that somebody can put up. That would be amazing. So that's a newly launched initiative that recognizes the hunger for partnerships and connection that we feel amongst our alumni and family network. And I certainly see it in my email inbox. Anybody's welcome to email me still, okay? That's on the table. But this is a way to start to collect the many interested parties that might want to learn more about the work that we do here, might want to connect with students, alumni and family who might want to find each other on axes of shared interest and purpose. And so this is something we hope to grow, and we will be seeking information from this network of how we can best serve the members of this network. So please think about joining. You can sign up on the website here, or you can do a simple paper sign-up sheet out there. So this is an amazing occasion for launching that network as well, again, signaling our intent to really accelerate our impact through partnerships and connections and relationships, because that's how we're going to get this done, right? That's the secret sauce that we believe in. So we're going to immediately pivot to the panel with those brief comments, and just want to thank our panelists for making the trip, in some cases from very close on campus in some cases, but in some cases from relatively far away, and our remote panelist, Merrill, who's joining us from California as well. Let's give them a big welcome. Thank you. Great, so it is my honor and privilege to introduce our moderator today, Zoe Kemper, class of 2024. Zoe, yes. Zoe is a senior at Brown, concentrating in applied mathematics and economics. She developed her interest in sustainable finance through living and learning in the US, Peru, China, and the Netherlands, and she is curious about how to drive sustainable economic growth in both mature and emerging economies. At Brown, she is co-president of FSIcon, the largest student-led conference on sustainable investing, and IBES is a proud partner and sponsor in that effort. That conference will be in March 2024. So I'll leave it to Zoe to introduce the rest of the panelists. Thank you so much, Zoe.
Yes, hi everyone. Thank you, Kim, for that. So it's my pleasure to be moderating this panel, and I'm really excited about the panelists we have. So first, we have Andrew Bernstein, class of '85. He is founder and managing partner of Kearsarge Energy. Andrew has over 35 years of business experience, starting in project finance and investment banking, and has been running divisions in companies for 25 years. In 2009, he followed up on a lifelong interest in renewable energy by founding Kearsarge, a business that believes it can capitalize on highly compelling opportunities to develop, manage, own, and operate solar and battery energy storage systems in the U.S. Andrew received his bachelor's from Brown and MBA from Harvard. He now serves on IBES Advisory Council. Please welcome me in. Next, we have Merrill Feather, who you'll see on the Zoom. She is class of 2005. She is co-founder of The Regenerates. Merrill co-founded The Regenerates, a network of marketing leaders working with climate tech startups and climate-focused venture funds. She has 15-plus years of experience in marketing and communication and startups. In communications, spanning in-house leadership roles in CPG, large tech companies, and scrappy startups. She studied international relations and Latin American studies at Brown, and her roots in Nebraska farming and Texas oil and gas inform her interest in an equitable climate transition. Please join me in welcoming Merrill. And lastly, we have Sarang, who I was lucky enough to take classes with a few years ago. Sarang Mani, class of 2021, is a sustainable growth equity investor at JPMorgan. Sarang works with private growth stage climate tech companies that aim to decarbonize the world's highest emitting sectors. He also leads partnerships for climate tech cities and was recognized as a future climate leader by the Aspen Institute. At Brown, he co-led the Socially Responsible Investment Fund and FSIcon, which we just heard about. He is passionate about climate solutions' role in creating economic opportunities for underserved communities and advancing the low-carbon transition in the global south. Please join me in welcoming Sarang. So I really want to thank you all for coming today. I think it could be really helpful if you could please briefly describe your background and your role in mobilizing the private sector for climate action. Andrew, we'll start with you.
Sure. Excuse me. I'm very pleased to be here, and I'm very pleased to see such a great turnout as well. Kearsarge Energy is a renewable energy developer. which means that we look for opportunities to create new power plants. We've mostly focused on solar and battery storage. It's been exciting seeing the business grow, because when I started it in 2009, there were a lot of NIMBYs out there. Solar, one of my favorite stories, which I can't resist but tell. We were at a planning board meeting. We were putting solar in Massachusetts, and a woman stood up and said, "I have a cat. And if you put up a solar facility with a fence around it, that cat's going to get underneath the fence and could get electrocuted." And I said, "Well, first of all, everything is locked and there's no danger." And she said, "My cat is very nocturnal. It goes out." And I said, "Well, one of the things about solar is there's not too much sunlight at night." But this is just an example of how far this industry has come, because you had comments like that starting. And now it's really exciting, because where some of the greatest growth in renewable energy is, it's not in Massachusetts and California, which have been the forefront. It's in the Midwest. It's in Republican areas, because it makes economic sense. And that's really what's driving it.
Thank you. That's great. Merrill, could I turn to you to discuss what you feel your background is and your role?
Yeah, sure. You gave a bit of context on my background. To kind of summarize it, I've been in marketing and communications and followed sort of my passions from CPG. And I actually worked in Pawtucket, Rhode Island for a long time at Hasbro Toys. I was at Facebook scaling their marketing team from 4 to 450, and then went really in-house at an early stage education tech startup. But from there got the climate bug. And so for the last four or 5 years, I've been working in this space. And the Regenerates, we're a small group. It's me and my co-founder and a couple of other folks. And we really work with, like you said, climate tech startups, which I'll give a couple examples because I think that sometimes doesn't mean very much to people, as well as investment funds. And we help them with their marketing and communications. They're companies like every other company. They need that work too. But to give a couple of examples, we did a lot of work for a long time with Imperfect Foods, which takes ugly, misshapen produce that would otherwise end up in a landfill and create methane, and delivers that to homes at a cheaper price that still tastes great. That's a climate solution. We've done work for a company called Gradient, which is an air conditioning company that produces a window unit that doesn't block your window, doesn't smell, and by the way, it produces a whole lot fewer emissions. Blueprint Power, which I don't know, Andrew, maybe you know them, but they work with large real estate developers to bring renewable energy on site and sell any excess energy back to the grid. So that's kind of speaking to some more of the hard tech stuff. And then we've worked with probably 5 or 6 investment funds who are specifically focused in the climate space and their portfolio. So I see my role as both kind of technologist and communication person, and have had this amazing view into the future, in a lot of ways, seeing a lot of these technologies really being incubated and built from scratch and on the cusp of scaling, and see my role as helping to scale those technologies effectively. But I also see my role as a communications person. I really actually believe that storytelling is a technology of its own, and it's a climate solution of its own, because how we talk about things and the stories we tell ourselves about things impacts how we the actions we take. And so I really look at my work as, we need to show proof of progress. We need to highlight the progress that is happening. The doom and gloom headlines in the news are real. I'm not countering them, of course, but they're not helping keep people motivated to work on this challenge. And now that progress is really happening, we need to shine a light on that to keep people working on this. This is a lifelong effort that will take a lot of people in a lot of different areas. So I see my storytelling and communications role as trying to leverage that tool, if you will.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I also think that's something that IBES and a lot of the groups at Brown are trying to do, is create that motivation and inspiration. So now I'll turn to Sarang. Could you answer, again, your background and your role in mobilizing the private sector for climate action?
For sure. And I think I should give a shout out. I'm pretty sure the founder of Imperfect Foods is actually a Brown alum.
Yeah, I think
And
so.
they sponsored
true.
the first and second FSIcons, so kudos to them. For myself, I don't have as much professional background to share. It's all of 2 years, so I'll start a little bit earlier. So I grew up in India and felt that I was always very close to the impacts of the climate crisis on people and communities and the ecosystem. And so spent most of my time at Brown trying to figure out how I was going to be part of the solution. I first thought that the pathway to doing that was by being like a renewable energy engineer. I studied engineering here, but I learned quickly, as many engineering students do, that I was a bad engineer. But I was interested in technology. And so I was interested in sort of the intersection of technology and business and climate. And what that led me to was this idea that I wanted to work on climate technology as sort of part of my job. And thankfully, I was fortunate enough to have a good group of mentors at Brown, people like Ricardo Bayon, who teaches a class here, and obviously many alumni like Zoe Kemper, who's very involved in the IBES ecosystem as well, who helped me find pathways to the role I'm in now, where I am part of a team at JPMorgan that does growth stage investing in climate-focused companies, in particular companies that are decarbonizing real estate and the built environment, transportation and supply chains, food and agriculture, and all sorts of heavy industry and manufacturing, collectively sectors that account for roughly 80% of all global greenhouse gas emissions. Think of these as companies that are at the forefront of transforming traditional industry through measures of both energy efficiency, electrification, and changing materials, changing supply chains to drive us towards our hopefully common goal of getting to net zero emissions by 2050. I'll stop there.
That's awesome. Thank you. So you spoke a little bit about that switch from engineering to now the business world. Could
sure.
you talk a little bit about, and you work in the private sector, so could you talk about why you feel the private sector is an essential player in the fight for climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to. And I think this goes back to how we think about some of these collective goals that we have, right? So let's say we can all agree, in this room at least, that our goal is to fight for a healthy and prosperous future for all on a livable planet, right? What does that take? What does it take to get there? So most estimates are something in the trillions of dollars of annual investment required. People will come up with different estimates. No one knows what $1 trillion really is. I've heard 4, I've heard 5, I've heard 8, I've heard 9. All I know is it's a lot of money, and we're not spending that much. Most estimates of where we are today is roughly $1 trillion, so somewhere between a fourth or an eighth of where we need to be. So the question becomes, where does that money come from? And there was an IMF report recently, I think roughly in the last month, that said that 20% of that will be covered by public funding, but roughly 80% needs to come from the private sector. And that's how really I think about what the role of the private sector is. It's a question of capacity. So where does the capacity for all the capital that we need to drive the transition to a net zero future come from? And then second quick point I'll make is on capability, which is the public sector does incredible things really well, in particular when they're first of a kind. The analogy I'd make is, for instance, the Apollo missions, right? Going to the moon, we do these things because they are hard, and the government is great at doing that for the first time because the private sector doesn't understand how to assess the risk. But then over time, they transition much of the responsibility, like the process of getting people to space, to the private sector because the private sector can deploy at speed and scale. And I think we've seen in the last few weeks that sometimes the government struggles to do things at speed and scale because we don't have a Speaker of the House.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
But I'll stop there and then it'll be
No,
helpful.
that's great. I would love to have your take on this too.
Can I ask you a question?
Please.
So do you think that private investors will accept a lower return for a climate-based solution?
So that's an interesting question. It's something that I've thought about a lot, and I'll try and cover this quickly. I think climate companies are different. I think they do have a complex capital stack. And I think what we need is public funding that demonstrates things that are first of a kind. Mm-hmm. There may be some need for catalytic and philanthropic money that helps do that as well. And eventually, those things get to commercial scale where commercial capital like ours doesn't offer concessions. Mm-hmm. But to answer your question, no, but the pathway to getting there might be long for some climate solutions.
Yeah.
Yes. So what we've seen is a little bit different. So
Yeah.
there's obviously many different types of companies getting involved in some of these challenges. But for the utility sector, it's exciting because we've seen the large infrastructure funds actually accept lower returns. Mm-hmm. And two reasons. One, they believe in ESG, and something that from a classical business background, I'd say everybody says, no, I got to have the same return. But a lot of the European investors, and Europe is much further ahead than the United States in focusing on climate change and many issues. But they're accepting lower returns. The other thing, which is really interesting, and you can take this right back to fossil fuel, and when you looked at how coal and oil and all these different fossil fuel resources evolved, they're actually pretty steady investments. So if you're an investor, the question is, would you accept 5% when you felt there was low risk for 10 or 15 years? And so that's what's very interesting about driving this whole next generation of renewables. So you're looking at the question, but when you're coming up with some really neat companies that Merrill's been working with and things like that, then it's more of a classic venture approach where you've got to have those same type of returns.
Right.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would love to hear, Merrill, your take on this and storytelling and how you can tell this story of the returns and also how the companies are working towards progress in relation.
Yeah, I think the returns question is a really interesting one, and I probably can't speak to any numbers specifically, but I do think that we are at the cusp of a lot of technologies that are being developed now that are not only in the renewable space, that are attacking things like electrochemistry and how do we build really commodity chemicals without fossil fuels. We need fossil fuels currently to produce the heat to make the ethylene that is the basis for so many chemicals in our everyday life. And how can we do that in a really like fossil fuel free way? And I do think that for a lot of those technologies that are really on the cusp of kind of scaling now, there is a really compelling story that these products are going to be irresistibly cheaper, they're going to be better, they're going to be safer. And when you can make irresistible products which I think is like a role of the private sector, make irresistible, easy to drop in and replace without altering supply chains, that kind of innovation, to me, and I have data to back, it's like that doesn't have to be a return compromise. That's a really compelling business. And those are large sectors, trillion-dollar sectors that are being disrupted. And we're really on the cusp of a lot of that happening. I think the other point I'll add about the private sector, which is just a little bit different and less about the investment side of things, but I really see corporations and companies as like an organizing body. It is like one of the core organizing bodies that we as humans have. I am not an either or person. We also need the government. We also need regulation. But when you think about there's lots of debate about, does individual action matter? Collectively, I believe it does. What's one way to organize people, corporations? And so when people are looking for how to take climate action, how to be part of the solution, to me, leveraging the collective action of the corporate body is a huge way to do that. So those are two very different points, but kind of my perspective on the question.
Yeah, that's great. That makes a lot of sense. I love what you said about irresistible investments. I think that's definitely exactly what we're trying to do. Could you talk, so you talked about organizing general bodies and corporates to be motivated in the fight. But how could you talk about your motivations and and what energizes you to work on climate every day?
Yeah, I think a couple things keep me motivated. One that always feels like the most standout is that I do think that in the work that I do with these really nascent companies, as well as with investment portfolios who have a really broad view on technology, I'm constantly seeing really crazy technology at early stages and the promise of it. So there's a lot of optimism inherently in that construct. But it's sort of this like uniquely privileged view into the future where I feel like I am constantly looking at what might be scaled 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And that is very motivating. The other piece of it is really about the wave of talent that I see coming into this space or raising hands. I mean, there are lots of young people who are just plain doing the work. So kudos to them, and please keep doing it, and please keep pushing the people who came before you to work on it more. But what I also see from my vantage point and in Silicon Valley is a lot of mid-career or senior leaders who are going, what's going on over there? I want to go work on that. How do I find my way into that space? And for example, I know a climate job board in the technology space that has seen 500,000 job hand raisers and applicants since 2020 alone. So these are big numbers. There's our talented people who have experience scaling technology in meaningful ways, and they're raising their hand and they're finding their way into the space. And that is whenever I meet somebody new who's raising their hand, it's energizing.
Yeah, that's really great. And I know, Andrew, you pivoted from banking and traditional finance into renewables. Could you talk a little bit about what motivated you to make that switch and what keeps you there?
Sure. I had run a technology company, and my older brother was an energy lawyer, and we started talking about things we might do together. And then were there some opportunities, and I'd done some work in project finance, which drives a lot of the financing. But I saw this as a really interesting opportunity to get involved in something that was starting to grow. And we originally started focusing on hydro. Mm-hmm. And this is some of the challenges in the United States right now, is that with something like hydro, which is a fantastic source of power. I mean, here we are in New England, and if you're in the solar business, you spend a lot of time looking up and seeing if it's cloudy or not. But May, June, July, and August set records in New England for how much rain, and we can't harness it. So when you look at different opportunities, what excited me was saying, well, what can I do? What's the low-lying fruit, if you will, and the blocking and tackling? And solar is an easier opportunity right now for renewable energy. And one of the biggest challenges for us is hiring people. And sort of what Merrill was saying right now, so many people are coming into this industry. It is so hard to hire. When you look at all the young people here, it's such an interesting area. And the salaries are right up there on the top level. So it's a really exciting time. But some of the people we're hiring, we just hired a guy who was at Silicon Valley Bank, which is a separate issue, but, and he joined, but he took a salary cut because he said, I want to do this. This is what's really important. And so you're seeing some opportunities right now. It's the same thing for me. I'm not really holier than thou, but we knew that with what's happening is we could deliver superior returns while starting to make a small difference, because solar is a very small piece of the energy growth.
Yeah, I agree. I think it'd be really interesting to hear Sarang's perspective a little bit on like navigating the careers, especially in post-college and finding a spot where you feel like you're making impact, but also learning.
I was generation COVID internship. I did my internship from my uncle and aunt's house in New Jersey, for instead of in person in New York City. But this makes me realize that. We didn't talk about this in my bio, but I have a somewhat similar experience in that I started out of Brown in sort of traditional financial services, started in investment banking at Goldman. and then transitioned. So I guess I kind of greenwashed my bio a little bit there, but so I started in traditional financial services, but I feel like the big thing while I was there was always this guiding principle of like, what do I want the world and my part within it to look like 30 years from now, right? And am I making the decisions that will help me guide towards that? You're never gonna find the perfect thing to do right out of college. But you can only sort of compass over maps your way to that. What keeps me energized, though, I think, and this goes back to what Merrill was saying, it's definitely the people. In my world, it's a lot more interaction with younger people who are working on this. It's people like you, Zoe, and all the people who are here today. I think that's what keeps me energized. It's the communities that I have found, both at Brown and beyond, who, in the face of dire climate news, offer me the energy to keep working on the things that we are all collectively excited about. And then I would be remiss if I didn't say that there's also obviously a transformative and major economic opportunity here, which, as someone who out of college is trying to find out what they want to invest their career into, I just kind of saw that as a big driver of what was guiding my decision making as well.
Yeah, that's great. Hanging on to every word you say about the don't need to find a perfect job out of college.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of students here and a lot of parents in the room would love to know a little bit about what the job sector does look like in this industry.
Sure.
And so, Andrew, I would love to hear your
Sure.
take on what you think, and then we can turn to Merrill.
Yes, so the job sector, certainly in the project finance, is red hot. We cannot find people to hire right now. People are jumping from company to company, which are not the people we want. But right now, so there's the largest renewable conference, which is mostly focused on solar and battery storage, that occurs every September. 7 years ago, there was about 8,000 people at this, and this was in Vegas. Last September, there was 36,000 people, and that's senior people, and the demand, and it's an international conference. So in that sector, but I think one of the most exciting areas right now, and exciting for technology, is battery storage, because that's where there's tremendous demand, and it's really early. And the thing about, I shouldn't even say battery storage, energy storage, because there's so many different types of technology, and there's no one. People say lithium-ion batteries. There's going to be all sorts of different technology, whether it's using concentrated solar, all sorts of different ways, and salt to store it. But this industry right now is so hot. There's so many people out there trying to grow their business, and there's so much capital. Goldman Sachs just created a $2 billion infrastructure fund to invest in this, and you're seeing more and more money coming into it. So if I'm coming out and I want to do something that I feel really good about, but that's super interesting, I think this is a really interesting area right now.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's exciting. Merrill, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on the companies you see that you work with, what the job sector looks like.
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. I think I kind of see it as both. There's the startup world and there's the corporate world, and a lot of times these companies need to work together to accomplish what they want to accomplish. And certainly the climate tech sector is booming. Yes, VC has had, venture capital in general has dipped recently, but climate venture capital has dipped less. So there is a continued rally around this company. I think I mean around this sector, and there's something like 33 billion in dry powder, which means investable dollars that have not been deployed in climate tech still, like as of a couple of weeks ago. So there's a lot of money still flowing into this space, a lot of early stage opportunities for especially for maybe young people who want to roll up their sleeves, get in-house, get experience, scale technology. There's also, of course, lots of large companies. I often think about the startups as like the activists and the larger companies as sort of the incumbents, and they're steering much larger ships. But if you move at a tiny degree, you've made a huge impact because they're already operating at scale. So lots of opportunities for sustainability roles. And I think stepping back even further from my perspective, like climate touches everything, and every job is actually a climate job if you want to make it that. I do think there is a sort of opportunity to just be entrepreneurial in this space. We've talked about some folks' career transitions. Yes, I'm still in tech, but transitioning into climate tech took work on my part. I didn't have a network in this space. I didn't know the companies in the space, and I really pounded the pavement for several months, meeting with people to find out where I could find my path through this space. And I do think, and frankly, I got a lot of kind of eye rolls about what marketers' roles should be. Aren't marketers part of the problem? Get people to buy stuff they don't need, blah, blah, blah. And I do think that it took some just recognizing what the gaps were and saying, that's a gap, I can go fill that, you know? And so I really encourage people to say, not just what is the explicit job opportunity that's listed, but what could I contribute and can I navigate my way there? That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. Turning to Sarang, who most recently was looking for jobs, I would love to hear your thoughts on the previous question, but also kind of how you felt Brown prepared you for entering a job in this space, and also looking for a job in this space, and what you've taken from your Brown curriculum. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Yeah. What I would focus on the Brown part of my experience is definitely the people and the opportunity around student organizations and things you can do outside of classes. So classes are incredibly important, and I learned a lot from my engineering classes and my classes that were focused on economics and environmental science that are learnings that I leverage today, but it was more about the process of learning how to learn than the content of the classes themselves. I think what I got the chance to do at Brown was get involved in student organizations and extracurricular activity, where I was able to build specific networks and specific mentors who helped me find those opportunities that I was looking for. And that was a big part. So both the jobs that I have today, I would not have gotten, or both the jobs I've had since I graduated, I would not have gotten if it was not for people I had known who were Brown alumni or associated with Brown in some way. And that's really important. The second, or I guess going back to the question of what the job sector looks like, so I would echo everything that Merrill said. So we talk to climate tech companies all the time. I think one other thing to highlight on that is that there's a big capital gap that exists for climate, right? We've talked about that earlier, but even within the ecosystem of climate funding that exists today, there's a big gap. And so there's a big ecosystem of early stage venture style investors who are funding these climate focused companies, and there's a growing presence of infrastructure type investors who are funding projects. What we haven't really seen is people filling in sort of the gap in the middle, and we've sort of heard that referred to in our work as sort of the missing middle, where there are these growth stage companies that are slightly evolving out of early stage venture dollars. They have technology that's proven, but they're not really at the place where they're like stable cash flowing assets that have very clear recurring performance. The dollars that need to go into that require very specific skill sets around financial modeling and strategy and operations and things like that. And both the companies who are in that space and the people who are supporting those companies, whether in government or investors or nonprofits that they're partnering with, all those people need skill sets that can help define a growth stage company's trajectory. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I see a ton of opportunity. You can turn your skill set into a climate skill set. And as Merrill said, every job can be a climate job.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I guess kind of to challenge what you were just saying, Andrew, I would love if you could answer this. How do you think, or Sarang, you as well, how do you think Brown and higher ed can help build those opportunities and help build those skill sets, especially with IBES? Like, how do you think we can be doing more as a school?
So I think that's a really interesting question, and looking back at, if I can remember it, my years at Brown. But one of the things that many people may know, but probably younger people are coming out, is if you're in an early stage company, your business plan is going to change dramatically. You're going to start in one area and you can go to another. Even if you're in finance, you may be investing at this sector. So I've run, probably 4 early stage companies, and we've changed our focus quite dramatically. So if you think about the Brown education, it's really kind of nice that you have the freedom to go to different areas. And obviously, I went to Brown, so I believe in it. But I think that when you look what IBES is doing as a cross-disciplinary area, I think that's really interesting. So you can bring in engineering, you can bring in environmental science, and having those different things. Because when we hire people, I want people who can write. And a lot of people are not so good at that, but I also want people who can think and come in different areas. So if you're coming out and you've got some of that skill set, and you can take applied math. We have some really interesting challenges right now when we're trying to figure out the math and the returns on things as simple as what size solar panels you're going to use because they're going to degrade over time. And we have some complicated calculations, and people who understand discounted cash flows and how that then comes back, but then how to communicate. So Brown has got this really neat approach, and we've hired people from other schools who are just completely focused, and they don't have that kind of background.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's the beauty of Brown, is being able to try classes across all the different concentrations. So I think we have time for one more question that I want to ask for all 3 of you. And this is a question that I love asking. I think a lot of the students in this room will take a lot from. But I'm curious to know, and I think Sarang will start with you. What piece of advice would you give to yourself 2 years ago when you were leaving Brown? Yeah. Or when you were at Brown?
I did some homework for this. Also, I just want to quickly say, I feel like no one else would have seen this, but when you said discounted cash flow, I saw Zoe react. Like, I could see, like, her eye roll to the idea of...
pain.
And I'll briefly touch on the last question, very briefly, which is that the interdisciplinary point is so important, and I love that Brown is kind of a choose-your-own-adventure type of place, and I don't feel that the prerogative should be to over-professionalize the Brown experience. Rather, it should be to build partnerships across Brown to offer students the chance to figure out what they're interested in wherever it intersects with climate, and then find their way to that sort of job world. Okay, that's the advice to IBES. The advice to students. I read this wonderful book over the summer called Ikigai. It's a book. It's a Japanese word that sort of translates to what makes your life worthwhile. It's not necessarily career focused, but the central thesis of it is that what makes someone's life worthwhile is an intersection of 4 things. It's what you love, what you can get paid for, what you're good at, and what the world needs. And what I would say to students is you think about what you want to do in your life after Brown, try to find your Ikigai. And you shouldn't think of that as there's one answer to that question. You should think of that as every time you seek a new opportunity, you are assessing it with that framework of whether or not it checks those boxes or is helping you get closer to checking those boxes. And then one second quick piece of advice is focus on building networks and friendships during your time at Brown. It is very easy to get carried away with life after Brown and thinking about, I need to do everything that I could possibly do to prepare for the career after Brown. But you're going to have 30 or more years to do the career stuff. and you're only going to have these 4 years to do the Brown stuff. So focus on the things that you can only do at Brown, do those first, and then do the things that are career focused that you could also do if you weren't at Brown.
I completely agree with that. I think it's easy to get wrapped up in focusing on your career, but it's so much better to just focus on Brown at the time. Merrill, could I turn to you to answer that question on the best piece of advice you could give?
Yeah, I love your answer, Sarang. That's a great framework I'm going to have to look for. I think some advice I would give, first of all, is just your career can be very long and it can have many different chapters. I think a lot of people would look at my resume and think that it is completely nonlinear and not be able to see the transitions. I actually started in nonprofit fundraising for a ballet company. So like, how do these things connect, right? I was a Latin American Studies and International Relations Studies major at Brown, and now I'm doing climate tech marketing. I mean, none of it is linear and none of it is A to B. And so to me, when I think about what has been most valuable about that time and the lessons I've learned, they're all the soft skills of, which kind of harkens back to your framework, Sarang, is just really paying attention to what I'm curious about, what I'm passionate about, and like running towards it. And I think about this the climate work I'm doing as a result of paying attention to that. And it was, like you mentioned, Sarang, it's at each individual transition moment, what is that for you at the time? And I would just say, even at Brown, where it's a choose your own adventure world, there is still a sentiment that there are certain careers that are the right ones, or at least there was 20 years ago, right? Or there's pressure, wherever it may be coming from. Parents, like, who knows? I'm a parent also, so as you can see, so I can say that. But I think that, to me, I wish I could tell myself, like, just relax. Like, you're gonna find your way, and the most important thing you can be is curious, adaptable, and have some grit. And you're gonna get it done. You're gonna find something meaningful, and you're gonna do great work.
That's amazing. Thank you. Andrew, we'll wrap with you.
Well, a couple of things. First, Sarang, 30 years, I think you can up that number a little more.
Sure.
But that's great. If you're going to retire then. But I think, it's hard to disagree, but what Merrill was saying, I'm trying to remember back when I graduated, and I put in a lot of went to a lot of job interviews, and I got hired in an investment bank. And the reason I got hired was because the guy had gone to Brown. And he said, I like brown people. So I think the importance of network is just critical. But I think also, when I look back, and if I'd like to give myself some advice, I think I could have taken more risks and done more different things. And I think it's what Merrill was saying, is not be afraid to fail. There's so much pressure, and certainly you've got to make money, but try some different things and jump around. And people say, oh, well, you had 3 jobs in 3 years or things like that. But if you can tell the right story, I started with a nonprofit ballet because I'm trying to find my passion, what really drives me. So if you want to take some risks and keep exploring different things, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to try banking, if you want to try the nonprofit world, because at least in our experience, we'll hire people from all different areas. Certainly, we may need people who know discounted cash flows and structure finance and things like that, but I know enough of it. But I think more importantly is just to try some different things. You're coming out, you're 22 years old, try different things, and you should try to walk away. And I'm sure I put pressure on my daughter, who's in the back of the room too, but you might as well try some different things right now, because in 5 years or 8 years, you might have family and all sorts of other requirements that don't allow you to have the same type of freedom.
Yeah, that's great. I'll definitely be watching this back when I'm having it. So now for the last 10 minutes, I wanted to open it up to audience questions. So if anyone has a question, first of all, I would actually like to thank our speakers, so if we can give them a round of applause. And then now I would love to open it up to audience questions. So if anyone has a question, please raise your hand, and then we have a mic up here. We can also move that around if you need. Anyone?
A super quick question. Yesterday I went to a panel on preventing violence against women, and the focus was on government. And you've been talking about alternatives to government, but I wanted to know in what ways has government policy helped you achieve your goals?
I'm happy to take it first. Or
Go ahead.
Andrew?
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I mean, I would say, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier around, what does the capital stack for a climate company look like? For us, I mean, government is a critical enabler, and policy is an absolutely essential tailwind for industry transformation. The Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the IIJA, bipartisan infrastructure law, the amount of funding, I think the IRA funding is, call it $370 billion towards really all the things that we care about, which is decarbonizing transport, decarbonizing buildings, decarbonizing industry, and decarbonizing land use. All of those things, that funding is critical to the companies we work with. To give you a quick example, one of the companies that we're an investor in is a company called Arcadia. I'm actually also an Arcadia customer. Arcadia connects people who live in multifamily buildings like me in New York City with community solar farms. So, for example, connect me to a farm in upstate New York, and I'm now a solar subscriber because I don't have a way of using, for instance, rooftop solar. And there's no way really for me to change that in the near future. And the community solar incentives that are in the IRA are a huge tailwind for a company like Arcadia that is providing a service to the community solar projects. I'll stop there. I think it'll be helpful to get Andrew's.
I would love to hear Andrew's take on this.
feedback
Yeah,
on this as well.
I think people forget that every major energy source has had government subsidies, and whether it's wood burning, fuel, natural gas. But I think that one of the major problems, sort of the reverse of this question, is the United States is that we can have incentives, and the only things that can really happen at the federal level is give tax breaks, because the way the United States is set up with different states. So what's helped drive solar in Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New Jersey has been at the state level. But one of the biggest problems, which is a little off the question right now, is that we can't connect the resources to the grid. And that has to be solved at the federal level. And it's the most pressing problem in the world right now. But when you look at different countries, India is a really interesting example where they've had a government policy where they've come in and said, we're going to connect these. So we're in a major shift in the world right now from centralized resources and big power plants to what's called distributed generation. So if we can get the government policy so people leaving and going into different careers here, we have to. And I don't believe in the United States we're going to be able to drive at that level. So what we have to do is going to have to be at a much more subpar level, or look at other countries that are doing it, or the United States is going to fall behind.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that's why it's so important that this is an interdisciplinary action at Brown, because there's classes in IAPA, which is the Institute of Public Affairs. But I think it's important to understand where people are going. Sarang, I see you want to have another point?
Quick comment on that. So that's super important, and I should have thought about this as well. But the interconnection grid point, just to give you a stat that always scares me, there are currently the amount of renewable capacity currently waiting, the amount of renewable projects, that capacity that are currently in the interconnection queue, which is the queue that sort of decides what project is going to go through the studies to be connected to the grid. That capacity is greater than the entire energy use capacity of the United States. Now, not all of those projects are feasible, but in theory, there are projects today, at least being considered, enough to decarbonize the entire grid. But we will not get there in any reasonable frame of time because it takes several years for that sort of timeline to play out, because we don't have the systems in place to integrate those projects into the grid effectively and quickly at speed and scale.
Wow, that's a really interesting statistic. I didn't know that. Does anyone else have a question? Go ahead.
So as someone 30 years into my career who's considering a change, yes, 30 years is not enough. I have a question, and thank you guys, very, very good advice overall. Question around nuclear, since you're all into energy. Germany just stopped nuclear. Where do you see the future?
I suppose I can answer that. I think nuclear, in the last 3 years, there's obviously all the risks with nuclear energy, which can't go away. But in terms of getting energy to the grid faster, you can't not look at this resource. But what's happened, which is driving this, is that once again, it's battery storage. Because the problem I think many people know with intermittent resources like wind and solar and biogas, some of the different things, of course, is it depends on when they're generating. But with energy storage and solar right now, the United States, the cheapest source of energy without any subsidies is solar and large-scale solar, which would be thousands of acres out in the desert with battery storage. So I think the opportunity for nuclear is going to go down. It's just too expensive in the long run, and it's going to drive the costs. The problem is, in the short term, if you need resources, you can probably get something built faster. So it's those trade-offs. But I think what we've seen in the industry right now as they decommission more and more nuclear power plants is that even in other countries which don't have the same standards and safety, that nuclear is not being considered at the same level as it was even 3 years ago.
That's really interesting. I think, unfortunately, we're out of time, but our panelists will be around, I think, after for the reception, so they should have time to answer questions. I know Kim wanted to say something, but once again, can we thank them all?
About the importance of the Brown Network for our student success and for partnerships for accelerating progress. So please do sign up for the IBES Alumni and Family Network so that we can build this community going forward and help our students plug in more. So we are going to transition to our hour of open house mode. There are tours of our greenhouse on the 4th floor, which is really exciting. You can go learn more about our curriculum, and there are some faculty and staff and students around in the corridors who can help you understand a little bit more about the work that we do. Thank you for coming today, and I hope you stay connected. Yes. Thanks so much. Have a great family weekend.